Welcome to the Combat Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Peacock. If you aren't already, please go to combatlearning.com/newsletter to get subscribed to updates on the podcast and training resources. To say thanks, I'll give you my transfer cheat sheet, a simple list of do's and don'ts for how to design your practice activities for maximum effectiveness. If you've ever wondered if your training methods are going to transfer to competition or self-defense, this cheat sheet is for you. Plus, I'll send you my little ebook, An Introduction to Motor Learning for Martial Arts, to get you up to speed on what we're talking about. Go to combatlearning.com/newsletter to claim that now. Today, I'm joined by Cal Jones, a fifth dan in Judo and one of the most qualified Judo coaches in the UK, especially Wales. In this episode, Cal Jones fills in some gaps with how to use the constraints-led approach for martial arts, especially grappling sports. First, he walks us through a system of understanding and controlling the degrees of representative learning design. This is a tool from an academic paper he's in the process of publishing with a research journal. Then, Cal walks us through task simplification and how to teach judo throws to beginners with minimal instruction and no reps or drills. Of note here is his discussion on how you use constraints and why you should never over-constrain. While many people think that CLA is about just doing jabs or just going for arm bars, that's actually not how CLA is supposed to work because it creates unrealistic behaviors. Also of interest, Cal even reveals that he doesn't teach break falls. And there are big judo teachers who aren't ecological who also don't teach break falls either. He also addresses how he conducts safe warm-ups in a dynamic and game-like fashion. And we even sneak in a short discussion on memory in the ecological dynamics theory. So if you're excited to jump in, hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher and enjoy the show. All right. Well, welcome to the Combat Learning Podcast. If you would introduce yourself and give a little bit of background so you can tell everyone why I'm having you on the podcast.
I'm Cal Jones, judo player from North Wales. I've done judo for 28 years now? Yeah, wow. A long time. I'm 34, so I don't know, I'll be 39 this year. So a long time. I've been coaching it since I was maybe 14. I started working as an assistant coach with the man who was then my coach. And then I took over the club as the head coach when I was 17, maybe. And I've predominantly been coaching through an ecological lens for that entire time. It probably have been teaching games for understanding more early days until I understood the value of specifying information and the context of representative learning design and all the other bits, and just refined what I was doing a little bit. But drilling, just mindless rote repetition, has always been an anathema to me. I've been opposed to it for a long, long time, ever since I recognized that there were people that did kata and looked amazing at judo, but just couldn't fight. You know, I kind of twigged that there was something very different to technique and skill, and very, very rapidly decided that just drilling wasn't for me. I've also done a master's in, I think it was called Advanced Coach Practice or something like that. But the rabbit hole I fell down was constraints-led approach and specifically representative learning design. So I'm in the process still of trying to have a paper published that's looking at developing a tool so that it can hopefully help judo players and BJJ players design more effective practice tasks.
That's interesting. Yeah. So I know that when you read something like there's a few books that everybody has to read when they get into the ecological sphere. But they kind of explain the concept of representative learning design, but there's not a lot of detail. So what does your tool look like if you're willing to explain it? How does it add content to being representative?
Yeah, so I guess it's there's a bunch of criteria that we can use to assess a practice task. So I think I've got 7 questions that each have 2 different fields. And as you give each practice task a score in each of those domains, it'll give you a rough estimate of a number that will tell you if it's low in representativeness or high. And you usually want the value to be higher than lower. But there's a good concept of specifying or representative enough. So as long as you've got some of the key variables that are necessary for us to actually be able to pick up on, there's enough representativeness in the practice task. Otherwise, you just do the whole sport all the time. And if you just do the whole sport all the time, the chances of you getting enough repetitions of a specific situation are very, very low. If I'm really hoping to improve my back finishes, if I just do, we stand up, we start a fight, the chances of me getting, I don't know, enough repetitions over 5 minutes of finishing from the back would be very, very low.
Right.
If you can create a practice task that forces you into that situation. So I think situational sparring is fairly common in BJJ. And I think a lot of people have started embracing it as a key thing, but there could be quite a lot of refinement that might benefit. So starting in those positions and creating little mini games where people are trying to finish in specific ways for different outcomes, really. One of the big stumbling blocks I see when people do positional sparring is they'll set, you can only finish with rear naked choke. It's the only way you can finish, because they want the person to become better at hand fighting, understanding how they can get into the position to finish with that rear naked choke. But you lose some representativeness by giving them an overly constrained target. The goal is too constrained. So there's a good little saying: we want the constraints to be handrails, not handcuffs. You want them to be able to explore the position. So when you say you can only finish with a rear naked choke, it will completely change how the person defending defends. I would just put my hands on my throat and hand fight, and I'd give no care or attention at all to the position of my elbows, because you can't armbar me. You can, get stuffed. I'll just do what I want. I'll have my elbows wherever they want to be. And because of the rule set is too constrained, it's too restrictive, it's no longer representative. I'm defending in a way that I would not be defending in reality, because you'd just transition and snap my arm off. You'd hang it above your mantelpiece at home. So I think this is one of the really useful things, is we can create a criteria where you're saying, one of the questions is essentially, paraphrasing, does the practice task have multiple outcomes that are available to people, where one is spotlighted or a specific outcome is highlighted? I think you've had Alan Dutton on here. I think I've listened to a few. Yeah, Alan Dutton, I think it is, was talking about turning the volume up on different sources of information without turning off signal. So I don't want to say you can only do rear naked choke. I might want to say you get 5 points if you rear naked choke. You get 1 if you finish with anything else. It's the first person to 10 points wins. At that point, I am desperate to get my rear naked choke, because I like winning. Winning is great. So I'll be paying more attention to it. I'll be picking up on the field of affordances available to me and specifically targeting that as a finish and seeing what I can do to manipulate people to get to that specific area without putting my partner in a position that they just defend in a completely unrepresentative way. Yeah. So that'd be a good example of how you can finagle practice tasks to be a little bit more representative.
Yeah, that's a mistake I made when I first got into constraints-led approach. I think almost everyone makes that at some point, where it's like, oh yeah, we're literally just gonna do jab now and defend the jab, and that's it. Like that's or we're only defending or attempting rear naked chokes or arm bars or whatever. And you screw up the behavior and the awareness of the person if you totally occlude really important information. So there is always a trade-off with representative learning design, but there's a point after which its usefulness is very limited or not very useful at all.
Yeah, exactly right. There's a saying I really enjoy that's reduce without impoverishing. So you can reduce task complexity as long as you don't impoverish the information that comes in. So I read the other day that sport is just an exchange of information between participants, and I thought that is literally what it is. It's not me knowing the move. It's not me knowing what a knee cut pass is and doing 100 repetitions of it a day so that I've got this perfectly ingrained move. It's a case of being able to pick up on the pressure that my opponent has, how their hips are placed, what they're doing with their hands. All these different variables have to be picked up by me, and I have to be able to attune to it and figure out what the hell I'm doing in relation to this massive information that's coming into me. So yeah, it's I think that's probably quite a valuable area for us, really, is that we can reduce the complexity of a task whilst keeping those variables as a true one-to-one. We don't want to then reduce the complexity of the task to the point that the variables are gone, which is what drilling is, right? It's you sit there like a lemon and I'm going to do 100 of these and you're just going to sit passively while I do it. At that point, I'm not coupling what I'm doing to any information sources at all. I'm just doing a move. It's a waste of time.
You're working in a sort of sequence that doesn't change.
Sure. Exactly right. Yeah, there's this sort of antiquated view of sport as just performing moves. People, especially in BJJ and Judo, we've got like a curriculum. There are known lists of techniques, in inverted commas, that exist that people collect. You know, you can be doing a thing, you could be looking at a specific area. And I've had children say to me, "Oh, I've done this before." Like, yep, I'm sure you have. Like, boxers have done the jab more than once or twice. But they get to, or people can get to a point that they just see it as, I need to collect more moves so I can find my silver bullet, know the perfect way of performing it, the one way that people can't stop, and then I'll be great. And it's just not that. You know, if you look at someone like Hodger Gracie, he's not doing inverted berimbolo, fancy pants, cool stuff that you see on YouTube. He's just really, really well attuned and well calibrated in what he does, and picks up on what his opponents are doing unbelievably effectively and just destroys them. You know, I'd rather be seen as sort of a basic player that is beautifully attuned to what my opponent is doing in the moment. That is where skill resides. It's not knowing the perfect technique. It's being perfectly adaptable to every situation. That's what we want.
Yeah. And the way that we talk, the way that instructors talk to their students, the way that students talk to each other, reinforces this notion that you have to have a specific kind of knowledge in order. So like you can't do something and you're like, I don't know what to do. And the instructor says, of course you didn't, because I didn't teach you the counter. It's like, no, that's not like, it doesn't explain why why a high level player can find himself or herself in a novel position in competition and navigate his or her way out of it in the moment. They didn't get taught a move. They didn't get taught a counter. So there has to be a way of figuring it out in the moment, and not simply recalling information that you've been taught before.
Yeah, exactly right. There's a hard assembly and soft assembly, right? So hard assembly is I've been taught this series of moves in this sequence, and I've done repetition after repetition. This is now some schema that exists in my brain, and I can pull it out, press play, and my body will do it. And that isn't what's happening. Some people may think that, but I'm happy enough to say that it isn't. It's not just I don't think. I might cause some fights for that, but I'm happy with it. What happens is we coordinate, we self-organize so that we can solve novel problems. We have a soft assembly. My body will figure out how to do something. It might be suboptimal the first few times, but we'll start moving towards a more efficient way of doing it. And the job of a coach, in my opinion, is to create learning environments or practice tasks that highlight specific areas, specific modes of moving or specific problems that help people become more dexterous in solving those problems. We want somebody who is incredibly competent at finding the solution to problems, not someone that can do one solution to one problem. The problem we have, I've seen, we have this fairly, I imagine it's probably more pronounced in Judo than BJJ, because we do have kata. There are people that have a technical obsession, and they will just do the dance routine, and it looks beautiful. But any kind of perturbation, any kind of disruption to their movements, their kinematics, and they become appalling. If I walk forward in a predictable way that follows like a little staccato rhythm, I do dun 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 dun. You can do this beautiful, really, really aesthetically pleasing throw. But the second I actually shift my weight towards my heels so that you can't throw me forward, you're not attuned to that. You've not got the capacity to pick up on the haptic feedback of my shift of weight and be able to combine it with a throw in the opposite direction. You've learned about combinations because you've done them for your theory, but you aren't skillful. You don't have the capacity to solve novel problems in novel ways. And that is the role of a coach, is to create the opportunity for people to be to experience a bunch of novel situations and novel problems and equip them with the skills to solve those problems.
Yeah. Combinations do not make sense when you make the leap to like a prospective motor control, because combinations emerge based on what you are perceiving there in the moment and only in the moment. Not I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Makes absolutely 100% no sense at all. And that's kind of deceptively what's happening when you do drills that are sequenced movements together. There's almost no situation where you're actually going to just do the guard pass from step 1 to step 6. There's usually that many steps or something close to that. You're actually going to be like, you're going to be hand fighting. You're going to be bopping somebody on the head back and forth and trying to lift the leg up and doing misdirection. And then once you get to some point to begin, you might have to change. You might have to change the energy. You might get stuck somewhere and fight for an underhook, or, like in the knee cut, you might get stuck in the knee cut and like be desperately trying to find a position you can be in so they can't take your back. So it literally never happens the way that you practice it in the drill. And so if you have a concept of affordances and how affordances dictate combinations, then you kind of have to let go of practicing combinations separate from, or really practicing combinations at all. That's just me rambling, but
no, you're right. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's one of the big problems we have in judo. There's an actual part of black belt bandgrade theory is combinations. It's you know which throws combine with each other, and you have to show them performatively as a rehearsed set piece that I'm going to come in for a shoulder throw, you're going to retract, and I'm going to do an inside trip. Cool. But that's not what happens, right? It's not knowing some nebulous combinations. The skill is in being attuned to what your opponent is doing. When I try and do something to you and you really don't want me to do it, you're not going to be reacting in the same way every time. And the same person won't react in the same way, and different people won't react in the same way. So it's, do I have the capacity to be able to see, feel, pick up on where your weight has shifted and what is available to me? It's, can I navigate that field of affordances? Can I move through all of the options available to me and select an appropriate one and execute something? I don't care what the technique is, how it's done. If I do a cartwheel and you end up flat on the floor on your back and they say "ip on" and point at me, I've skillfully negotiated that situation. Doesn't matter if my technique looks scruffy as all sin. I have performed a skill. And that isn't rehearsing combinations in a prescribed set order. It just isn't. It's it's painful. I've tried putting it out, but I'm not a 70-year-old man in Zori that likes to be called sensei, so you get no traction in judo in the UK.
Well, probably anywhere.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
It's the same thing in my world. I mean, I do jujitsu, but in my world, it's taekwondo, and so I worked really hard to get to my 4th dan, which is the level at which you first start to become, referred to as a master. It doesn't matter if you're a master. Like, if there's always somebody who's like, well, I've been doing martial arts for 40 years. I've been doing martial arts for 50 years and teaching taekwondo forever and whatever. There's always somebody that's going to pull rank on you and like not engage with whatever it is you have to say. But yeah, it's infuriating. But I'm interested to know some. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's even more egregious with judo. There's some sort of pseudo philosophy that's underpinned with it as well, having come from Japanese traditional martial art. People tack on a lot of sort of pseudo Eastern mysticism to it as well. You know, if you we have the tradition of bowing consistently, and it has become fetishized by quite a few people in Britain. Whereas in Japan, it's just how it takes the place of a handshake.
Right.
But it could be very, oh no, you have to bow to the room in which you're training because that's what they do in Japan. Okay. So if you criticize anything that is traditionally done, it's not just that you're criticizing a training modality. There's some insulting the art form of judo that can be, I think BJJ is new enough in its popularity that there's not quite so much, there's not so much of that. You know, you've got people like Eddie Bravo that are coming out with the most weird names on earth, and no one's calling him a sacrilegious man that should be banned from the sport.
The Gracies tried, I think, and they didn't succeed. They just let it go.
Yeah, I think that was probably going to happen. Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to whinge about judo. Sorry, that was fun.
No, jiu-jitsu is definitely better. Taekwondo is kind of the same.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah,
lots of not real philosophy, mind you, but they call it philosophy tacked on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am interested to know some of the specifics of what you do in your own practices. One of them that I'm very interested in is how you teach break falling from a constraint-led approach.
So as a general rule of thumb, we don't really concentrate on break falls that much. It's one of those things that you kind of become accustomed to really, really quickly. I guess if you don't break fall effectively, you only do it 2 or 3 times and then you break fall perfectly for the rest of your life. I mean, judo's, it can be pretty unforgiving if you're not falling with any kind of forgiveness. But essentially, the difficulty with learning break falling in context is it has to be done in context. So the only way you can really do it is by starting with low velocity, low impact stuff. So we do a thing that we used to call point of throw randori. So you're coming in, you're doing everything, you're trying to defeat each other, but you don't finish with massive throws. So I'm just getting to the point that I know you are doomed here. If I wanted to Hulk out, you'd be pate on the floor, which is a useful way of sort of bringing people in to do all of the bit that is relevant. They're in a position that they're learning how they can manipulate people to the point that they can throw them through the floor without pulling the trigger quite so hard. And then when you do that, we can just pause. You know, I know you're doomed here, and I'm just going to take you over. So it's essentially half a Nagakomi tacked on to actual valid representative practice, just so that people can get a little bit more acclimatized to the floor. But with the kids, it's just almost all done through a games-based approach. We'll play little squat break fall battles. So they'll both sort of take a squatted position and they can only push each other like hot plates. So you can't leave your hand on. You just have to give them a short, sharp shove. If they fall back and put their hands on the floor or don't break fall, you get 5 points. If they go back and do a break fall, you get 1. So the kids very rapidly, as they're heading towards the floor, just slap the floor, because it's really annoying when you put your hands down or you don't and your partner gets 5 points.
Right.
And then we start building up. So you play similar games where you're just trying to trip each other. So we can do it as like a game we have called Lord of the Rings, where you're sort of holding onto your opponent's sleeves and trying to sweep each other. And as they fall, they have to try and get a break fall in there. So you can get a little bit more context specific break fall in. But yeah, it's honestly not something I pay that much attention to. I know one of the guys who's like probably produced the most people on the England talent development pathway for judo. He doesn't coach break falls at all. So like they just have never done it. Like, his kids don't learn to break fall. It's something that passively they learn how to do. There might be some discussion of slap the floor and tuck your chin in. But just from the gradual increase of complexity of task, you know, you're falling from this height and you're 5, it's not going to be that damaging. And then you're this height and you're 8. So when you've got a young group, it's less relevant. If you've got, you know, someone my age with brittle bones and a sore back, then I'd have them doing a couple of basic repetitions. They understand a basic kinematic of what they're what they could do, and explain.
They understand where on the body they should. Yeah.
Yeah. So the slapping the floor part, the increasing your surface area so you don't get winded, is the less important bit. It's just tuck your chin in. Like if you tuck your chin in, you don't get concussion. That's a good thing.
Right.
And really, really quickly, people pick up on it. Yeah. So yeah, it's honestly not something that I give much attention to anymore. I've had a whole bunch of new seniors joining us, and none of them I've had no head to floor collisions. It's just, yeah.
It's interesting
because nothing good for you there, I'm afraid.
No, that's totally good. That touches on another thing. I released an episode recently from guys that use constraint-led approach to teach swordplay. And after they moved from like a traditional drill-based approach to a constraints-led approach, their major injuries almost disappeared, even though guys were going at it harder than they had before.
Yeah.
And it's just that funny thing about the constraint-led approach that you immediately think, oh no, that's going to be way more dangerous. People are going to get hurt, but it's a limiting belief. It continually, as I talk to people, it doesn't seem to be the case that if you do a constraints-led approach, that you're actually going to be at a greater risk of danger. If anything, the injuries might be lower.
Yeah, 100%, because there's more opportunities to fall in a contextually congruent way, right? When we're just drilling, I'm falling in a way that I never ever fall in when we do randori, when we do sparring.
Yeah.
I don't fall in this. You're throwing me from this position. I'm stood with my arms out like a zombie. It's a really false version of falling. So you learn this technique of break falling in isolation, and then when you get thrown, it's nothing like it. We do, so the traditional break fall in judo, you have your chin tucked in and use both hands to break fall. You fall back and do this big slap. And it's like, that never happens. I've never, ever seen anybody do a 2-hand backward break fall in the nearly 30 years I've done judo. It just doesn't happen because people have a grip on their opponent, or their opponent is holding their arm. It just doesn't happen.
And you're not going to let the grip. You're not going to let the grip go because you would fall faster.
Yeah. And they're not going to let the grip go because they want to transition. They want to get the hold down, or they want to snap on an arm lock. It's a really false way of falling. So I think the fact that we don't learn it as a specific skill, decontextualized from the context that it's actually performed in, is probably a big boon for it. It means that you get more repetitions, or more variable repetitions, more repetitions without repetition, of doing break falls, the skill, breaking your fall, rather than break falls.
Right. Even in jiu-jitsu, you think that would be an area where you might see the double arm backwards fall? Oh, okay. Did you lose the sound?
Sorry, it's back. Sorry, my battery was dying, so I plugged in an aux, and I thought I'd get away with it. It'd be fine, but it will cut out. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Now, I was just saying, you think it would show up in jiu-jitsu, the double slap would show up, because you have situations where, like, either you're in seated guard and somebody, like, pushes you really hard and backwards, or, somebody can shove you and you can trip, fall backwards. And because you don't necessarily have to take someone down, you could just do seated guard or something. But you never see it because they want to keep their arms in. If you push somebody back, they need their arms here to help with if you're going to pass guard. So it still doesn't even happen there. So what about, uchikomi? Is that what it's called? Where you do half the throw?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you feel about uchikomi? What's a better way to approach things?
Don't do it. Don't go near it. It's antithetical to learning skill, basically. So
sacrilege.
I know. I'm so sorry. I almost got banned from a judo forum for saying that once.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. No. Essentially, it's when you decouple practice task anyway. So you're learning something in isolation, away from the sources of information that you need to actually learn to become skillful. It's poor. But this is taking that to the nth degree. You're what's the term? Not decontextualizing. You're breaking it apart. So if
decoupling.
No, not decoupling. It's when there's constituent parts of a skill that you're learning in different phases. There's a term for it, but my brain's not
decomposing. Decomposition, yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. At least one of us has a brain. When you decompose a skill and start trying to learn isolated parts and then stitch it back together, there's a whole raft of research that shows it doesn't work like that. So there's a famous paper with a tennis ball toss. So they had people trying to throw a ball in a specific area so that they'd be better at hitting the ball from that position. And they practiced this tennis toss so that they could get the ball in the same position consistently, so they could have a tennis serve that was more reproducible. They'd have consistency in where the ball landed. And they found that when you start trying to stitch that ball toss back into an actual tennis serve, it just didn't work. The skill isn't in becoming really skillful at each of these elements and then stitching them together. You can't do that. It's really ineffective. The transfer's poor, and it's bad. But Judo, they do it. In Judo's defense, I think people have really moved away from it. I think that now there's just some apologia going on, and they use it as warm-ups. So rather than doing something that's more beneficial, in my opinion, some little contextually driven game where you're trying to achieve a goal, they just do this so that they can warm up the relevant muscle groups, and I think it's more tipping a hat to it rather than thinking, this is going to get me really good at throwing, doing a turn in for a throw 100 times and stopping.
Right.
But there are still some people that hold it dear to their heart. But no, it's I don't think there's a replacement for it. It's just ditch it. Don't go near it. It's really, really ineffective. It'd be like practicing half a guard pass. I'm just gonna put your knee down on the floor and put my shin halfway to your leg, and then I'm going to stop. And I'm going to go back to the start, and it's just ridiculous. Really, really strange way of doing things.
Yeah. So speaking of warm-ups, that's my next question. So how do you approach warming up the body at the beginning of class?
So I suppose the first thing we do is just a game that's targeting muscle groups that will be used just as a way of literally warming people up. But that takes less than 2 minutes, and it's usually something that's just a bit of fun because the majority of people that come to me aren't interested in competition. They're not interested in becoming elite at the sport. They do it because they enjoy the sport and they like throwing people around. So I have no issues at all with doing something purely because it's fun. There's probably very little value in skill development in just a random pulse raiser. But yeah, they come for it. They have fun. And then as soon as that's done, we'll usually try and target a specific area. There'll be something that we're looking at that week, and I'll look at designing a game that complements it. So before we broke up for Christmas, I was having a brief look at some Kumikata stuff, some gripping things. So we're playing a game called Quick Grip. So it's essentially first person that can get two hands on their opponent wins. If you get two hands on and then you have one hand on, you've won the game. Then it's quick grip throws. So you're doing the same thing, but after you've got your grip, you have 5 seconds to try and throw your opponent. If you throw them in that time, you've won the game. If you don't, it's a draw. And we go back to the drawing board. And then you extend that so that you have quick grip 5 seconds. So if I get myself a grip, I have 5 seconds to throw you in that with that grip. If I fail to, I have to change to a different grip. So I don't have to stop and start the Kumikata phase again, the gripping phase again, sorry. I can just transition to a totally different grip. So you're essentially looking at a bunch of stuff that will be relevant for the sort of focus of the session. So we're looking at the prevalence of the benefits of killing the power hand, if you're right against right, their right hand in Judo. So a bunch of the games we're playing, we're looking at trying to stifle that hand while we can establish grip. But if it was, so we are doing a no-gi class as well. So I've got a few guys that do MMA, and we'll do toe taps and knee slaps. as a useful game, so they can get penetration steps. If they can put their foot on your foot, they get a point. If they can slap your knee, they get a point. So they're in position to score singles and doubles. So you're essentially finding what the skill or what the specific area that you're hoping to target in the session is, and try and build in a little game that adds some specified information, but it's essentially putting them in the position that they're using the muscle groups and moving in a way that is contextually relevant to the skills they'll be performing in the session itself.
Okay. So no shrimps on the floor by yourself?
No. None of that. No,
that's a jiu-jitsu thing that doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it's leaked into judo. There's that for us now. The classic. I know if I visit a club, there's a 95% chance we're going to run around a mat. Then we might touch the corners of the mat. Then we'll all go to one side and do forward rolls across. Then we'll all go to the same side and we'll do backward rolls across. Then we'll do some shrimping across. It's been the same for my whole life. And the majority of clubs that you go to will be the same thing, where they just fall into it, do the same little thing. And it's not warming up, really. And then, I mean, we don't have the scope to go into the ridiculousness of people doing static stretches before exercise, but that's still done. I mean,
it is.
Wild.
Yeah, it's baked into so many, even Taekwondo places too. It's just baked in. You got to do your whatever. You just everything's formalized, and the warm up isn't really that good. I mean, it takes, like, if you do a little game, you get warmed up in like 3 minutes. If you do that, it takes like 8 to 15 minutes to actually get warm, and then you're like breathing hard and. So it's if you're gonna be like that, why not just do it like immediately? And the thing about jiu-jitsu is you're gonna get partnered anyways for like 85% of the rest of the class. Why can't, if you're gonna do reps of shrimps, why not do it with a partner? It changes the quality of the movement when you have a partner and you have something to actually put your frames against. It's wild.
You're actually shrimping the way that you would shrimp. Like, you wouldn't shrimp pushing off the floor. You'd frame on your opponent.
When you do it on the floor, you're supposed to like pretend to have frames, but people are always pushing like this.
Pushing the
which almost never happens unless somebody's like trying to do like a smash pass on your legs and you're pushing their head away. That's the only time you do that. The rest of the time, it's you need to have your elbows in, and you're like at a different angle. And you're not just going away, like you're making space and then coming in. So that's just the whole quality of the move. But it's impossible to do if you're doing it by yourself because you don't have that tension there. It's
weird, isn't it? But these
I need to make a video about that because I feel like if trying to explain it, if you don't already understand the concept, you just don't get it. So I need to make a video of like, here's how the movement changes when you put a partner in the equation.
Well, you could do that with every single move, can't you? I mean, that's the value.
True.
You're practicing your stack pass while your partner just sits there passively letting you do it. Look how different a stack pass is when your partner's trying to stop you. Look at how all of these variables are completely different. So when you're practicing this little version of a stack pass with a passive opponent, you're not actually practicing a stack pass. You're doing some completely different skill. But you're right. I wonder what it is that it sticks in the zeitgeist so much, because I bet you could go to a new jiu-jitsu club and you've got a 90% chance that they'll be air shrimping at the start, right?
I think it's just easy to do. And then just a lot of people have had, if you go up the tree, everyone's had similar instructors from different, like, especially in regionally speaking. So there's a lot of reasons why that happens. But so bringing everything together, what's a typical CLA judo session look like for you at your dojo?
So there'll be a focus. There'll be something that we're looking at that week. There'll be an area of interest, either to me or to one of the people that's competing or that's taking part. and we'll design practice tasks based on that specific area. So I think I've spoke about it previously on multiple occasions, but something like foot sweeps is the classic I use frequently, where we're, instead of doing some rote rehearsal of how you can time foot sweeps, you just create some mini games. So my classic progression would be something as simple as playing tug of war. So we're each going to take a grip of each other. You're going to try and pull me to one side of the mat, and I'm going to try and pull you to the other side of the mat. So for a couple of repetitions, we're just dragging each other. There's no foot sweep at all. And then as soon as we have a couple of repetitions of that, we add in, if you can sweep your opponent's foot and they fall to the floor, you win as well. So it's not just foot sweeps. You can also win by dragging your opponent. So what happens then is you end up with these really exaggerated postures because people are really trying not to be pulled forward. So the center of mass gets really compromised backwards. It becomes very easy for me to get the feel of what it's like when my opponent's belly button, their center of mass, is behind their base of support, behind their heels. I feel what that's like. Haptic feedback is so important in our sport. You know, you don't get to see a lot. Like people's bodies are in the way and I'm looking up, so you have to get that feeling, understanding when their weight is shifted back, and then you start trying to time foot sweeps to take them out of position as their weight is compromised. The problem with that is it's unidirectional. It's just forward and back, and people tend not to walk forward and backwards as the only direction as they go, unless it's fencing, I guess. So then I put a game that I call landmines in, because I have a sixth sense of humour, where there's a couple of rubber spots on the floor, and you just have to make your partner step on a spot on the floor. If they step on a spot on the floor, you win. So at that point, you're multi-directionally moving people. You're trying to make them step into an area, and they're trying to not step in that area. So they're consistently compromising their center of mass. They're losing balance or giving very strong reactions against the way I'm pushing or pulling them. So learning what that feels like and how you can time foot sweeps, or actually any kind of foot sweep or any kind of foot attack to take advantage of the way that their weight is shifting becomes much, much easier. You're essentially you're saturating the feedback, the information that I'm trying to attune to. There's a bunch of times that you're putting your weight in really compromised positions, and it gives me a bunch of opportunities to try and time the sweep. The chances of me getting them to stand on a spot is really low, because they, it's pretty easy to not step on a spot. But in the act of avoiding the spots, they compromise their weight, which is the actual goal of the task. It's not how good can people get at making people stand on rubber spots. It's how often are they compromising their weight. And then you build that up so that you start adding in throws at the end of it. So you get 5 points if you foot sweep your opponent. You get 5 points if you can make them step on a spot, because you still want those massive reactions from them. And you get 1 point if it's any other throw. So it's back to that, not turning off the signal. It's just turning up the signal and the things we want. So then they're learning how they can integrate foot sweeps into randori, into actual sparring. How can you use this fact that you're putting them in a really compromised position, giving you the opportunity to try and sweep them, but they've avoided it. They've not fallen over. But in the act of avoiding that sweep, they've further compromised their balance. They're in a really poor position now. Can I then uchimai? Can I come in leg reap you? Can I drop underneath you and do a shoulder throw? The whole skill, the skill of fighting, of doing judo, then starts becoming built off the thing that we're looking at. It's the foot sweeps are the area that I want you to be focusing on. That's the area that we're looking to try and improve this week. But it's contextualized as part of the actual sport itself. It's not all decoupled for the whole thing. There's a bit where we've reduced the complexity of the task whilst keeping specified information there. And then we increase the complexity as we go, as they become more attuned to those variables. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. What made me excited was when you're talking about teaching leg sweeps, you were you added the but the goal that you can also win by dragging somebody out of a certain area, which causes them to posture a certain way that creates an opening for the sweep. So you don't it's not just, all right, you got to do the sweeps, because you're going to get these exaggerated, you're going to look more like wrestling where your rear end's backwards and your feet are out of reach. So that seems to me like the principle of an example of amplifying affordances. And you've done that without adding any sort of physical difference. You didn't put like a red dot somewhere or a weird colored gi jacket or something. You modified a task constraint and it caused it to organize itself that way.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of the more interesting things that we can play with in judo. You know, when you're in a field sport, you can change the environment more easily. For us, it's pretty, well, in my opinion, I think we're limited a lot more with, you can pretty much only use task constraints. It's one of the things that's most valuable for us. You can't play about with the environment all that much. We do some games, because in judo, if you step out of the contest area, you're penalized. So we do some stuff where we're looking at trying to develop edge play. But the majority of it is not dependent on the environment that it's in. So I love doing that, finding a way of finagling a little rule change so that you get exaggerated movements from your opponent, so that you can start to tune into that information more clearly. I think it's cool.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's really something that a lot of this stuff is stuff we've kind of covered on the podcast before, maybe not exactly the same way, but that piece of information I think is worth the listen for the entire episode, because those specifics are always the little eggs that I'm hunting for. Because I feel like I've been a lot up here, like talking about CLA from 1,000 foot view. But what does it look like in practice? How does it change? So yeah, that's really awesome. That's exciting. I love it when I can hear that kind of stuff. That's really cool. With Taekwondo, you also get penalized for stepping out of the ring. Right now, I think the ring is actually too big for competition. So it's not, so you kind of have to, if you're going to use rings in practice, you kind of have to have them smaller, or else only like two people can, or four pairs can, or two pairs can actually fight. But, I do think there's a lot that can be done by making it smaller or changing the shape of it that hasn't been explored yet, even from maybe a kickboxing point of view too. But I'm thinking more in terms of sport Taekwondo. It's just what's the equipment that you use to scale that? Because usually the ring in Taekwondo is the mat, and there's a different color that denotes the edge. And so you can't just like bring the mats up in the middle of class and make everything smaller. So like, I think there needs to be some sort of equipment implement of rapidly scalable boundaries.
Do you wear belts in Taekwondo?
Yeah, we do.
I'd put belts to make a corner. Because I imagine one of the big things essentially is you've got a flat edge and you have a corner, right? So the landscape of affordances available to me when my opponent is in a corner is rapidly or vastly different to when they're in open mat, because they have to either circle or push forward. So the things that I can attune to from that position are very, very different. So yeah, if moving the mats to create corners in the colours is infeasible, if it's too much of a pain in the butt, then tape or some belts, just so that there is an actual demarcation on the floor that they know if they step out of it, they'll be penalized and they'll lose the game, so that you're forcing the behaviors that would actually exist in contests. They will end up circling or pressing forward or trying to strike you backwards. And at that point, you're learning, what can I do? I know, or I'm aware that there are certain options that are available to me here now that weren't before. They can move this way, or that way. They don't have retracting and retreating away from me as an option. So you're essentially creating an artificial barrier just by putting some tape down or some belts. I do that with judo consistently. It's one of the things we do. We do a sumo game. So if you can push your partner out of either 4 mats, or if you can push them out of the belted area, you win. It's as simple as that. Or you can throw them to the floor. So when they're close to an outside edge, they don't want to go backwards. So they start pushing you forward, and you again have this massive haptic signal. You get all of this weight shifting towards you, which would be what happens if they're on the outside edge of a mat in contest. They do this big push, and then you can start learning to calibrate that information and couple an action with it. You can actually get a throw based on that. And you just create so many opportunities by forcing it. It's just, this is a sumo game, but what it really is we're actually looking at edge play today. I want you to be really well attuned to what happens when your partner's on the outside edge and they don't want to step out and get penalized. So I think that would work with Taekwondo.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. I don't care. So if I do this, it doesn't matter. But it's a little bit taboo to put your belt on the ground in Taekwondo.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's the same way.
Don't do belt then. Sorry. Do I don't know. Just tape. Bit of that.
tape could be. I just hate to pull it up and down and get the adhesive on the mat. But the belt is a good idea. I don't care. So in my club, we're going to do that. So no, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. I really like that. Just buy some big fat guy belts and
just use mine.
Size 10.
Mine's a big boy now. Every year mine gets smaller for some reason.
Cool. Okay, so switching gears, the dreaded subject, memory. Memory and skill acquisition. All right. How does memory work? Does it not work? What is the ecological approach to memory?
I don't know, honestly. The scope of the question's probably beyond me. There's some cracking discussions on it. If you don't mind me shouting out Rob Gray's podcast, there's an amazing discussion between him and Andrew Wilson on the role of memory, where they're far better than I'd be able to. They give a far better explanation than I'd be able to. But essentially, I think I'll take a stab at it. I think that there's a difference between remembering and knowing. So you want to do is an active process. So I have to remember where I put my keys when I'm having a panic that I have to be out of the house in 3 minutes and they're not where I thought they were. That's an active process where I have to search my brain and go, oh God, where is it? Did I put it there? That's something that I am doing actively. I don't have to do that to remember that I'm not allowed to punch someone in the face in judo. That's something that I know. I just know I know that I drive on this side of the road. I know that I shouldn't put my hand in a fire. I don't have to search my brain when I see a fire and go, oh, should I put my hand in there? No. I think that there might be a language limitation that we don't describe the act of knowing very well. We always think of it as I remember. It does sound like I have memory seems like an active thing. And I don't think it always is. So a lot of the time when I'm well situated and I've got a good grip of the field of affordances in front of me and I'm able to react and attune to stuff without having to search my brain for options and for what I should be doing. I'm not remembering the move. I'm just well situated in the environment itself. So, my opponent has posted their hand and I have scooped that hand out. I don't have to search my memory and go, he's created a post there. There's some structure that is keeping his weight up. If I remove that hand, his weight will collapse, which will give me an advantage. I've just moved it. It's something I know. I'm aware that structures, breaking them down is a good thing for me. So I can't, I'd love to be able to give you a better answer, but I think that's where I am currently. I think that there's a big difference between remembering and knowing. And the confusion comes where people have this idea that we create these schema, these little motor programs of doing moves in idealized, perfect ways that we just remember and press play on and it's done. I don't think that's what memory is at all. I think the sort of snobby, sort of self-aggrandizing ways, I don't think that our understanding of space-time is effective enough to be able to describe memory the way that it is in an ecological way yet, or at least mine isn't.
For me, so the ecological dynamics is mostly the scale of analysis is at a different place. So we don't concern ourselves a lot with the particulars of physiology, of what's going on in the brain, of what's going on in the nervous system, of what's going on in the muscles. So we're kind of aware of some things, but that's not, we're looking at what the outcomes are. And we're trying to explain them in terms of system behavior. and not system behavior in an ecological way, not only constrained to what's going on inside of the body. What I've struggled with is trying to conceive of how improvement persists. So I understand information movement pairing. It gets better and more as you attune perceptually to the information variables. What persists the improvements from one practice to the other? Because there seems to be, so Rob talks about hysteresis, like where the system tends back towards a previous state of organization. And so you do develop a particular way that you move in response to training that other people don't. And so I'm trying to figure out. So what I say now is it's just distributed through the brain and the nervous system and the muscles and all that stuff. We just don't know how it works. They all work synergistically, but it's so complicated we can't really say one way or another. Rather than the IP is hierarchical, everything is mediated from the top down. That's it. That's all I got.
We end up with like attractor wells, don't we? There's specific ways of moving that we become acclimatized to and accustomed to, which is one of the big issues when you've done a skill or you've performed something against people that aren't particularly competent and you've got away with doing it really inefficiently. So let's say in judo or in grappling in general, I'm trying to pick somebody up and throw them to the floor. And I only ever train with people who are 50 kilograms and I'm 100 kilograms. Well, at that point, I can get away with a lot of kinematic inefficiency. The way that I'm lifting could work against little light people. But the second I fight someone that's the same weight as me, I might be really, really inefficient in how I'm lifting. And that skill that I've developed doesn't fit in with a larger opponent, right? So at that point, there'd be some kind of perturbation where I'm trying to break down the assembly of how that lift has been done to create a new version of it. You're trying to move out of the attractor well and create a new area of a new skill, essentially, trying to find a new fit. And I think that that's where the problem is. We have this hysteresis. We have these attractor wells of what we become acclimatized to, but our body is pulling everything in that direction. It's moving me to move in that specific way because I've done it often enough that it's become ingrained somewhere and somehow. How that's stored, I don't know. I'm not sure that people smarter than me have an answer. So I don't know whether it's just my lack of knowledge that I don't know, or if it's just that it isn't known yet.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think Rob has said that this is an area where there needs to be more work. And then there's some professors that they just released the new book on Introduction to Ecological Psychology, and they're great. They've cleared up a lot of stuff, but they're describing system behavior and they're not really describing the mechanisms.
It's one of the classic attempts at rebuttal is what's physically happening. But it's become a bit of a cliche, I suppose. But there is the idea that it's not what's in your head; it's what your head is in that is important, which I think is quite fitting. It's not just these patterns that are stored in my brain like a computer hard drive that I just have to go through the file of facts and pick the right one.
Right, yeah.
How do I navigate the environment that I'm in as a person environment fit that is super, super crucial. Well, it is everything. It's the exchange of information between people within an environment. That's pretty much what all sport is. Well, almost all endeavors, really. There's context to learning. I might be appalling at maths. We have darts is fairly big and was on our sports channels the other day, and people were talking about people who were really limited at maths in school. They failed their GCSEs, our sort of first proper qualification. But because they're darts fans, their mental arithmetic is through the roof. They're just so good at maths because the environment of having to work out what your score is. I assume people are familiar with darts. I'm not sure how popular it is over there. But if you're hitting a double 13 and then a triple 7, and you have to work out what your score is so you know what you're trying to hit, you have to be incredibly quick at mental arithmetic. So these people that were appalling at maths had no interest in it. They weren't If you ask them to sit down and learn trigonometry, they have zero interest. But as soon as there's an environment fit, they start learning incredibly effectively. I think it's a thing that we overlook too frequently, is that it's not just storing things in your brain. It's creating a fit between a person and the environment that it's in.
Yeah, I have a friend who's actually been on the podcast. He's a Taekwondo coach, and he's does constraint sled stuff. And he did like an escape room or something. Is a story he told me. And if you were to like put a problem in front of him, without context, it probably wouldn't be that quick at it. But it was sort of a business adjacent context in which he was asked a very complicated math question for the sake of gaining a clue in this escape room, and he solved it like that, to the point that one of the persons that was in some escape rooms, I guess there's controllers outside that are kind of watching what's going on. Like the controller made a comment wow, that was really quick. It was very noticeable. He's like, I don't know why I can do that. And I was like, I know why you can do that.
Yeah.
Because your learning is very context specific.
100%.
There's almost, I don't want to say there's entirely there is no general learning, but almost there is no general learning.
Yeah, well, it's the big problem with a lot of these brain trainers, and Rob Gray again talks about this fairly frequently. There's no, I could do a whole bunch of trying to remember which card has the spot on it, and it's just not going to help me remember where my keys are. It's just not.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool, man. I appreciate you coming on. I'll let you go, but before you go, where can listeners find you if they want to reach out and ask you questions?
Oh, I'm on Twitter. I'll be at Cal Jones Judo, CAL Jones Judo. I'm always happy to matter skill and coaching.
Awesome, dude. Great. Thank you for coming on again. And I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. Great chatting.
Thanks so much for listening to the Combat Learning Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, remember to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. It really helps us out. Finally, this episode, including the intro music, is produced by Micah Peacock. Thanks in advance, and I'll see you on the next episode.